Okay, so we have the lighting set up on the bed and the scenery, and it's looking pretty good. So moving on to the next stage of texturing, what we have to do is we have to unwrap all the parts of this model, or UV unwrap. Now to do that, I'm just going to let's go to a new scene. Where's it gone? Going blind. New, of course, absolutely. Control N. Control N. It's a new scene, alright. And I'm just going to bring this up and I'm going to change this to the image, UV image editor. Right, so first of all, I suppose we should talk about UV. What is UV? Well, what we do is, let's add something here. What we do is we create 3D objects. Okay, so it's got 3 dimensions: X, Y, and Z or Z. Okay, and when we go to texture it, textures only have 2 dimensions. Okay, which basically is the X and Y. But how do we correlate the 3D space to a 2-dimensional texture? Well, we do that with a UV map. Now, all UV really means is their coordinates, same as X and Y and Z or Z, but X, Y and Z is already in use on the 3D object, so they simply for the mapping they call it UVW, except there is no W because there's only 2 dimensions, so it's a UV and therefore it's a UV map. And all we're really doing is mapping the surface of this or any object onto a 2-dimensional texture. Right, so UV basically means XY, but X and Y is already in use, so it's UV. It's as simple as that. Right, well, we've got this kind of cone here. We'll stick with that for starters. The first thing, whenever we're going to bake or create a texture, is we need a new texture to bake it onto. So we've done this before. Press new. We've got untitled. I'll leave it called and call it what you like. I'll leave it called untitled for now. Texture size, default in Blender is 1024 by 1024, which coincides actually with the maximum texture size in Second Life. That's not strictly true. You can upload a 2048 by 2048 texture into Second Life, but it will compress down to 1024. But anything larger than 2048, Second Life will just reject it, saying it's too large. We've got a colour for the texture, you know, so if we, let's say we made this red and we pressed OK, we've got this red texture. Anyway, I don't want that texture because I want to show you something else, so let's move that default back down to black. Okay, alpha. We're all aware of alpha channels, which basically is an extra channel apart from the red, green and blue, the RGB, that shows transparency. Now most textures won't need transparency, and in fact cycles cannot bake transparency, so I always turn the alpha off. If I need to do any transparency work, I take it into Photoshop, or you can take it into GIMP, or whatever program you use, whatever. But this is what I wanted to talk about, was the generated type. Now Blender gives a couple of options here. The default is blank, which will just give you this blank black texture. You can also have a color grid and a UV grid. I tend to use these a lot, especially when I'm unwrapping stuff. Okay, what's the difference? Well, a UV grid is just a series of checkers with slightly colored crosses in the middle, or the color grid is sometimes handier, where it actually gives you this kind of map with coordinates on it. For now, I'm going to use the UV grid. We've used the color grid before when we was doing the Suzanne bodies, but I'm just going to use the UV grid. Okay, so I've got this texture here. Now I need to unwrap this object. So if I go into edit mode and I've got everything selected, you see nothing happens down here. There is nothing going on because we haven't unwrapped this object. Okay, so how do we unwrap this object? Well, if we press U for unwrap and we just press unwrap, we see we've got this mess, really. I suppose is the best way to describe it. Let me just do a face select or an island select here. Face select. So if I select this circle and I just move it out of the way a bit, obviously that corresponds to the bottom. Okay, but what happens here, if I select one of these, move it, you can see it's starting to become a mess. Okay, so let me reset this unwrap, which comes back to here. It doesn't matter, we've already done this. You know, we can change it. You can always change a UV map to a different type or style by resetting. Okay, so what do we need to do here? What we actually need to do is we need to split this up into separate parts. Okay, so yes, the face unwrap properly at the bottom. The bottom unwrapped properly, but the sides are just all these triangles overlaid on top of this map, overlaid on each other. Okay, so we need to kind of tell Blender, hang on, I need to split this up a bit, and this is how I want to split it. And we do this using seams. So if I was to select an edge, say this vertex here, well actually let's do it with an edge. If I was to select this edge here, I can mark this as a seam, which will tell Blender, hang on, we're going to cut this down this line and kind of roll it out, so it's more readable, it's more usable. Okay, so I've selected this edge, and now if I want to mark a seam, it's in the mesh menu and it'll be under where would it be? I normally use the shortcut. Not there. Yeah, under edges. I thought it was, which is mark seam. The shortcut I normally use is and now I forgot it. It's in the specials menu under the W key. So no, it's not. Control E. Sorry, I'm getting rusty. For the edges menu and mark seam. So I've marked this seam, and you'll see that it turns slightly red. If I deselect everything, you'll see that's red. Okay, so now if I was to unwrap this, so I'll select everything, unwrap, you have a look down here, okay, and you can see it's an absolute mess. Okay, let me just another tip here is you've got where is it? Getting rusty today. It's down here. Yeah, there we go. This button here. This will sync your UV window to your 3D window. So anything you select here will also select on the 3D window, and vice versa. Okay. Sometimes easier. Sometimes it's a pain to work with. But for this we will. So we see we've got this absolute mess down here, and basically what it's done is it's kind of cut it along this line, but everything else is still joined, and so cutting it along that line actually achieves nothing. You've got to think of this like as if you're making a paper template or something, and you can roll it out and fold it out into a flat texture. Okay, but here, because we've got this base, this won't be able to roll out flat. So we need to mark another seam. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select this bottom base, this circle, this ring, and once again I'm going to mark that as a seam. So Control E, mark seam. Okay, now if I select everything and I unwrap, let me scroll out here, you see this is looking a lot better, and we can actually read what's going on here. We've got the base here, let me zoom in, we've got the base here, and we've got the cone all coming up to a point, and all the edges follow around each other. They're all nicely sized, you know, they're all equal in area, so it should unwrap fairly well. Right, and we did this simply by marking two seams, you know, that would be able to roll this out flat. Right, so how is this texture going to look? Well, if we go into the texture mode, no, material mode, and we haven't added a material to this, so we'll add a new material. We'll assign that, and actually I'm going to have to use nodes here, so let me go to my node editor. We've got this. We need to add a texture to this, so it's Shift A, add a texture, an image texture. We'll plug this node in, color to color, and we'll select our Untitled 03. Okay. Right. So let me try and get a better view on this, and let me tab into object mode. You can see how the texture is mapping. It doesn't join up exactly here, but that's something we can tackle a bit later on, but you can see the seam. But the rest of it is all looking pretty good. All these squares are roughly equal in size, the way we would expect them. And that's mapping pretty good. So that's the cone simply unwrapped.